So after 10 years of running technology businesses, I wanted to clear my head, as I'm sure you can imagine. I wanted to get into a different state of mind, start from scratch. So I took a pilgrimage to Costa Rica's Corcovado rainforest. It is the most biologically diverse place on the planet, 2.5% of the world's biodiversity. And on that journey, not only was I confronted with the smells and the sounds and the colors of what real diversity looks like, but also the people were the friendliest, and it was one of the safest places and most friendly places you can find in the world. And so when I left there, after I finished my time in the Silicon Valley, I didn't want to leave this state of mind behind. I wanted to find a place that was closer to my family and to my friends, but that wouldn't put me back in the busy doingness of the world. I wanted to find a state of being, an office, if you will, to combine this that I had learned in the rainforest and what I had been seeing and experiencing in the Silicon Valley. And so I find myself a partnership with a landowner in Sussex, and we agreed to do a one-year experiment where I would take 25 acres of his woodland. I bought a shepherd's hut on eBay and wheeled it with my mates, bumbling down the road, awkwardly getting it into the woodland. And I began, no services, no water, no electricity, and started to see what it would be like to try and figure this out on my own, to build my physical environment as I was trying to rebuild my mind from scratch. And both in the rainforest and in the woods, I'd say it completely flipped both my theology, my philosophy, and if you do that, naturally what you create comes out very differently as well. But when you go into the woods, the first thing you have to really encounter is the darkness. And don't worry, you'll only be in the woods with me here for a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes. But you realize how dependent we are on the electrification of our lives. When it gets dark in November at about 4 p.m., it doesn't get light again until the next morning, you go into a different kind of space. And the other thing about losing all your goals is without goals, you lose narrative. Without narrative, it's hard to get people to understand what you're doing. And I only told people, just come down and experience it. So I'm going to ask you to do something really briefly in this darkness, is to stand up and to swap seats with the person next to you. Okay? So if you do that now, go for it. I see some awkward moments happening. I see some awkward moments happening. Okay. That's great. That's great. And now some of you who are cheating, who are near the stage, have the lights of the stage, and it wasn't too difficult. Sometimes there was a full moon, and it made things a bit easier. But some of you are really in the darkness there. And when you don't have the information that we're used to, when you don't have the patterns of behavior that we're accustomed to, you have to find a new way of feeling, hopefully not too much, but feeling your way through to get things done that we would normally take for granted. You have to do small experiments because you don't want to knock anybody over. You don't want to make brash movements. You move slowly, maybe a few stutters, a few words exchanged. But you have to find a new pattern for doing things when your environment is unknowable. And if we bring the lights back up, I feel that this actually is not too different from the world that we're finding ourselves in at large. But if you're willing to go to those spaces, you can find some incredible things, like this glowworm.
And they're all through the woods. Not loads, but like we see 3 or 4. And we sound crazy because nobody believes they're in England, but they are.
Little bright green LED light as we were walking arm in arm, trying not to fall down any holes in the middle of the night walk, which became a regular occurrence when friends would visit. But as spring came and the days got longer and it got a bit warmer and the bluebells began to grow, I started finding some co-creators, people that were coming to the woods and teaching me things like how to take these trees down and to turn them into a new cabin, how to grow vegetables, how to forage, how to engage basically more deeply with the environment that I ignorantly wandered into. And in this space, what surprised me is it wasn't just voyeuristic. When people would watch videos like this, I decided one day a week I would make a YouTube video. And it wasn't just voyeuristic. People were beginning to contribute to my experience. So although I had gone there to live in this hyper-local fashion and to learn how to grow vegetables and potatoes for the first time, I didn't even know how to cook at this point, so I was really starting from scratch. Actually, there was this extra layer that was different to what our ancestors have been doing in their bids to survive. I was connecting into this global community. 20,000 people some weeks were connecting in and not just saying, well done, mate, but actually providing me knowledge like, you need a carbon monoxide detector or else you're going to choke yourself out. I was like, right, duly noted, and off I went and got one. But also people were bringing their creativity to the table. Forgive the dirty fingernails in this photo, but I was actually doing work with the land. This actually came to me from Australia. Someone wrote me a beautiful handwritten note and posted this badge, which is a picture of the first hut I bought on eBay, and sent it to the pub that was 10 minutes down the road from the forest that I was living in for me to go pick up when I was going for a cheeky pint one day. And so actually this was more than just a hyperlocal experience. It was not just a global experience, but it was a hyperlocal and global experience. And on the days that were most of them, that I wasn't thinking, cheeky spoiler, that I wasn't thinking about what we were making and how to learn in the land, obviously, as you can imagine, my mind was wandering, thinking about what is real, what is really going on in reality in this world that we find ourselves in. And I realized that the biggest threats that we are facing that are somewhat unique to the generations that have gone before us are the environmental crisis, really coming to a head on how we think about our relationship with other forms of intelligence, artificial intelligence at the top of that pile, and how we deal with nanorobotics and the governance and the laws and everything that we've been hearing that goes around that. And almost a symptom of the world that we're living in is this massive refugee crisis that we're facing. 60 million already and maybe 250 million in the next 20 years, not just because of war and displacement, but also because of the environmental crisis itself. And so I compared my hyperlocal and global experience and the fact that my mind's running away on these big issues that we've got to do something about. And then I look at when I went back on weekends to see my family and my friends and looking at the public narrative and the discourse around Brexit and basically a national form of politics. And you realize that there's this huge disconnect from the experience I was finding and what I find that our conversation predominantly is revolving around. And it made me ask the question, and it just kept coming back to me in a very, very inconvenient way. But what if the very nature of this idea of organizing the world through nation states just isn't fit for purpose anymore in the way that it was when it was conceived? And thankfully, I had friends, all kinds of friends came to visit from all over the world to come and help build, to create music and art. And some friends came and taught me stuff. And two of the friends I've met along the way, called Abbas and Berivan, are Kurdish friends who the nation state has failed. And in Abbas's story, from the day that he was born in an Iraqi refugee camp, then to Iran and Iraq, smuggled to the UK, 10 years, an asylum seeker. He's a poet, and at 33 years old, never been accepted by any governmental system. Never told, you're all right, mate, as long as you sort of behave, you're all right, you're welcome here, you belong here. And I'm really pleased to say he got his asylum granted just literally 2 weeks ago. But that's not okay, and that is not okay. This nation-state system has failed these friends of ours. And thankfully, the conversation has found a spike recently, and Yuval kicks it off nicely.
We now have global ecology, we have a global economy, but we have national politics. And this doesn't work together. Either deglobalize the economy and turn it back into a national economy, or globalize the political system.
Carol's taken a stand.
Our democracy is broken. Our laws don't work anymore. And it's not me saying this, it's our parliament published a report saying this.
David from Cambridge gives me a bit of juice.
It's possible that by clinging onto the nation state, we don't allow these more community-based forms of democracy to thrive.
Zuckerberg might be in trouble with Carol, but he is one of the only people that's got experience with trying to work out how they do what they're doing and integrate it with the existing nation-state paradigm.
You need it to work at the global level, but then you also need individuals in each of the member nations in that system to feel like it's working for them too.
Michael, who's analysing how the hell we're getting on in the data at a global level with the UN's SDGs.
We're forecasting actually a decline in the score on personal rights to about 60. Now, obviously, these things can change quite quickly with changes in law, changes in attitudes. But we have to accept that on current trends, this is probably the most worrying aspect of the SDGs.
So out of all the areas of progress we're looking for in our global community, whether it's sanitation, health, opportunity, it's personal rights and inclusiveness that we are going dramatically backwards as we speak. And those that were leading that charge have fallen to the back of the race. He's not saying that this is the answer, but he's definitely saying something needs to be done. The Extinction Rebellion lot have kicked up a fuss.
We don't think that the actual current political system is capable of dealing with this greatest threat of all time. So, in fact, a citizens' assembly, they can be trusted much better than people in political situations right now.
And in a world of many voices, you can always trust this guy to give you a bit of a reality check.
We are experiencing the 6th mass extinction in Earth's history, and it's not too late to do something about it.
And who would have thunk it a few years ago, but this man is talking a lot of sense.
There are certain values that human beings can return to, like the principle of fraternity and solidarity and service and sacrifice. If there's no recourse to fairness, then what is it we're trying to build? And I think that's the problem that we're confronted.
But there is one thing that all of these critics or commentators have in common, and it's that none of them are offering solutions. None of them are suggesting, so why don't we do this then? And to get a bit of courage on that front, my favorite TED talker of all time, Brené, has a line that sticks with me.
This is who I want to be. I want to create. I want to make things that didn't exist before I touched them.
And so it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to figure out how we move forwards when the conversation hasn't really gone there yet, but knowing an ever-increasing feeling that I can't let this idea go. And so after the year in the woods, I began to get invites. People began to ask me to say, could you bring this kind of Corcovado way of doing things, this creative, off-grid way of connecting and encouraging our creativity? Can you bring that to our land? So I went to Scotland and France and to Spain, to chateaus and gin distilleries and little villages. And I did these recce's and met these landowners. And in November last year, I took 100 creatives, artists, poets, writers, musicians, and we went and spent time in these places to get informed by the wisdom of ecology, to gather together in basic friendship with no plan or goal and just to see what emerged.
I noticed that creation sparks our curiosity to connect on another level, to build together, to emerge into an unknown adventure. Who could we meet? What might we experience? And isn't that what's exciting about life?
And so that film actually comes out this weekend, a story of how we've connected all around Europe. And this year as a community, we'll be thinking about how to do that all over the world, to begin to rethink from the ground up. How do we respond to all these technologies that you guys are talking about? You know, it's always been our human challenge to discover fire and then to figure out how not to burn our house down with it. And we need the wisdom to go hand in hand with the tools that we're generating. And in a way, for me, especially when you're going and hanging out at these derelict castles and chateaus and stuff, it really smells like Renaissance, that rebirth of the Middle Ages. And we sure as hell know that we need, we're in more need of that wisdom now than we ever have been in the past. And so, if I take what's happening at a community level with my sort of 100 friends all over the world, and I think about these grand ideas that are coming to me in the woods, I've kind of coming to a place standing in front of you today where I want to kind of build an MVP for what a global state could look like. Could we have a life where we have a dual citizenship? We have our national citizenship, we pay our national taxes, and we want that system to be as effective and future-proofed as possible. But could we also have a part of our identity that remains loyal and pays into our global identity? A form of governance that's direct, that's run by civilians in a networked swarm kind of way, that allows us to naturally tackle some of the global existential threats that nation states just aren't necessarily well suited to do. And so that MVP, for me, looks like a global hamlet. And a hamlet means up to 100 people with few or no services and just a couple of buildings. And I'm like, well, that suits me pretty well. We've got a couple of chateaus. We're not very good at what we're doing yet, but we are a group of friends crucially formed from all over the globe. So taking that view from the beginning point, could we build a civilian service that takes the money all the way out of politics, that allows us to directly feed into decision-making as a lifestyle, not just as a once every 2 to 4 years opportunity? And so this weekend, as we gather, I've been putting 1% of my income into a mutual fund, and we will literally be putting those 200 quid notes on the table, and in the most analog fashion possible, deciding not just where to put that 200 quid, but how are we going to decide about where we put that 200 quid, and figure that out as a very small group around the table and take it from there. And I guess what I'm saying to you is, aren't we already living this life? Aren't we already buying our bread from the bakery and buying our books on Amazon? Aren't we already living with one foot in the analog and local and one foot in the global and digital? Especially you guys in this room who are not just consuming that experience, but actually generating it and creating it thoughtfully as well. Isn't this just a logical step of how we think about protecting and governing the spaces that our lives exist in? And so I ask you, if you don't believe me, if you think that I'm talking a load of polycock from the woods, go back to the woods, matey, that's fine. But get engaged with this nation-state paradigm, join Extinction Rebellion, become a political candidate, support your party. We are not in a time where we can just sit and let things roll past us. We do not have the time to do that. But if you, like me, think maybe there's a hunch here, a bit of a sense that maybe we do need to evolve our forms of governance and maybe a hybrid system could be useful, then I ask you to get involved. Get with some mates. Think about what it means to collectivize and swarm both your time and your money just a little bit, even if it's an hour a week that you set aside outside of the market. You don't have to go and build your own toilet and shovel your own shit in the woods to get into this mindset. You just need to create a little bit of space that's not constrained by the market like the rest of our working week is. And to land it home, I want to take you back to the woods and just say that underneath all this, the philosophy that has governed what we've built over the last 200 years is uniformity. It's where industrialization comes from, economics, it's how we get the measurement of GDP. And if we don't change how we operate, it will kill us. And I absolutely believe that the fundamental operating philosophy that we need, the starting point of any conversation, needs to be diversity. And when I was in the woods, the landowner showed me that, I asked him, how can we measure biodiversity? How can I see if me being in the woods is affecting positively or negatively the environment I'm inhabiting? He said it's very difficult, but one good key telling point is whether there's butterflies. If the butterflies die or fly away, that's a pretty good telltale sign that you're doing something negative to the diversity in that environment. And if they thrive, it's a good sign that you're doing well. And this is the kind of human scale, the emergence that we want to see, the dance of life. We want to see culture thrive. And I absolutely believe that diversity as a fundamental philosophy is where we need to start with designing and thinking about the systems that we build. And if you agree with me, but you think, bloody hell, I don't know where to start with all this. It all seems very detached from my life right now. I just encourage you to go to a quiet space, a dark space, the hut at the end of your garden, the study, put your noise-cancelling headphones on. Just carve out a little bit of space in your life that's outside the normal constraints and start looking inside to try and engage with that sense of the unknown, that place in you where you can examine your relationship with the unknown and see whether there's some bits you could be doing with your life that go beyond the day-to-day. Thank you ever so much for listening.